Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel and comment below the time you are watching this video so we can send our best wishes and peace to you and your family members. Don't forget to comment and give us suggestions to improve better stories to serve everyone. Thank you. Story 1. I was 13 years old, sitting in Mr. Bennett's science class at Hollow Creek Junior High. The classroom buzzed with the low hum of fluorescent lights as Mr. Bennett droned on about chemical reactions. Outside, the winter storm pounded against the windows, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. He had left early that morning for a delivery up in the mountains. Then came the knock. Sharp. Deliberate. It sliced through the room's warmth like a blade. Even Mr. Bennett stopped mid-sentence, his chalk hovering midair. The knock came again, louder this time. "Who on earth?" Mr. Bennett muttered, heading toward the door. When he opened it, the figure standing there seemed carved from the storm itself, a tall man in a long, heavy coat. Snow clung to his hat and shoulders, but his eyes, they were pale and cold, like twin shards of ice. His gaze swept over the classroom, stopping when they found me. "Alice Monroe," he said. His voice low and gravelly. It wasn't a question, it was an order. I froze. Mr. Bennett frowned. "Excuse me, but who are you?" The man adjusted his gloves, his movements unnervingly slow. "I'm a friend of her father's. There's been an accident. He's asked for her at the hospital." My heart plummeted. "An accident? Is my dad okay?" The man's gaze didn't leave me. "He's alive, for now. But time is running out." Mr. Bennett hesitated, his hand still on the doorframe. "If this is so urgent, why didn't her father call the school directly?" The man's expression hardened, his lips curling into a faint, humorless smile. "The storms knocked out the lines. Do you really want to waste time questioning me while her father's life hangs in the balance?" I felt a wave of nausea, a sense of wrongness creeping over me. But the fear for my dad was stronger. "It's okay," I whispered, grabbing my coat. "I'll go." Mr. Bennett looked uncertain but stepped aside as the man held the door open for me. The second we stepped outside, the cold swallowed me whole. Snow whipped around us, and the wind howled like a living thing. His car, a dented, rusted station wagon, waited by the curb, its windows fogged over. He opened the passenger door with a flourish. "Get in," he said, his tone softer now but still commanding. "We need to hurry." I hesitated. The unease was back, stronger this time. "Why does your car smell like that?" I asked, crinkling my nose. He tilted his head. "Like what?" I couldn't place it, a mix of damp earth, iron, and something faintly rotting. "It smells weird." He chuckled, but the sound was hollow. "It's an old car, Alice. Now get in, before it's too late." I slid into the seat reluctantly. Inside, the air was stale, and the heater sputtered weakly. As he pulled away, I stared out the window, trying to fight the growing knot in my stomach. "This doesn't look like the way to the hospital," I said after a few minutes. The road was wrong, narrow, twisting, lined with trees that loomed like silent sentinels. He didn't look at me. "Shortcut," he muttered. "There are no shortcuts to the hospital," I pressed, my voice rising. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles bone white. "Your father's dying," he snapped. "Do you want to argue, or do you want to see him before it's too late?" I shrank back into the seat, his words like a slap. For a moment, I stayed silent, but the knot in my stomach only grew tighter. "If this is a shortcut," I said carefully, "then why are we going deeper into the woods?" His head snapped toward me, his eyes locking onto mine. What did I just say? His voice was cold, razor sharp. "Stop questioning me." My hand instinctively reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he said simply, his lips curling into that unsettling smile again. "For your safety." "Safety?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "I don't feel safe." He laughed softly, a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "You'll feel even less safe out there," he said, gesturing toward the storm raging outside. "Trust me, Alice. You're better off here." The car skidded to a stop in front of a cabin that seemed to rise out of the storm like a predator from the dark. Its windows were boarded up, and strange symbols were carved into the wood of the door. The sight made my skin crawl. "We're here," he said, his voice unnervingly calm now. He stepped out and opened my door. "Come on." "I'm not going in there," I said, my voice shaking. He leaned in close, his pale eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice." I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. He grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the car, his grip like iron. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit by a single lantern that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something sharp, metallic. The walls were lined with jars of dark liquid, their contents obscured but shifting slightly, as if alive. "Sit," he ordered, shoving me into a chair. "Why are we here?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He knelt in front of me, his face inches from mine. "Your father made a promise," he whispered, his breath cold against my skin. "And promises must be kept." "What promise?" I gasped. "I don't understand." The door creaked open, and I turned to see another figure step inside. A woman this time, cloaked in black, her face hidden beneath a hood. She carried a bundle in her arms, cradling it like a newborn. "She's ready," the man said to her, his voice reverent. The woman set the bundle on the table, unwrapping it with deliberate care. My stomach churned as the cloth fell away, revealing something. A dark, pulsating mass, wet and alive. Its surface slick and glistening. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The man smiled. "Your inheritance." The woman spoke then, her voice low and otherworldly. "Will you accept it, Alice? Or will you let your father's debt consume him?" Tears streamed down my face. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please, just let me go." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp, too white. "It's too late for that." The lantern flickered, and the shadows on the walls seemed to grow, stretching toward me like claws. The last thing I heard was the woman's voice, soft and melodic, weaving words I couldn't understand. And then, darkness. Story 2. I didn't start gaming to lose myself, but that's what happened. At first, Shadow's Cape Online was just a distraction, but over time, it felt like the game was watching me more than I was playing it. Then came Spectre. From the moment she joined my squad, she wasn't just a player, she was a force. Her voice was sharp and commanding, like she'd seen things I couldn't even imagine. And she had a knack for pulling you into her orbit. "Don't second-guess me," she said once during a raid, her tone cutting through my hesitation. "Indecision gets people killed." "You're intense," I had joked nervously. "You have no idea." Her words stuck with me, long after the game ended. One night, after a particularly brutal session, she messaged me outside the game for the first time. "Spectre, still alive, soldier?" I hesitated. It was odd seeing her words outside the confines of the game. But I replied anyway. "Me, barely. You really push people, you know. Spectre, if you think tonight was hard, you're not ready for what's coming." "What's coming?" I murmured aloud. staring at the screen. The next time we played, something felt off. My character was moving on its own, drawn toward an area of the map I didn't recognize. A crumbling fortress loomed in the distance, shrouded in mist. "Spectre, where are we?" I asked through the mic. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. Almost hesitant. "This isn't a place you find. It's a place that finds you." I laughed uneasily. "That's cryptic, even for you." Her tone hardened. "Stop joking and listen. Whatever happens, don't open the door." "What door?" But before she could answer, my character stopped in front of an ancient, iron-bound door set into the fortress wall. It was unmarked, no quests, no objectives. Just waiting. A new voice crackled through the headset then, deep and distorted. "You've come far." "What the hell?" I whispered. "Who's that?" Spectre's voice cut in, sharp and panicked. "Don't listen to it. Log out. Now." The distorted voice laughed. "She's afraid. She should be. Open the door, and I'll show you why." "Who is this?" I demanded, my hands trembling on the keyboard. "No one you can run from." I logged out in a panic, slamming my laptop shut. My phone buzzed a moment later with a text from Spectre. "Spectre, tell me you didn't open it." "Me, I didn't." "What's going on?" Her response came after a long pause. "Spectre, sometimes, the game chooses you. And it doesn't let go." I stared at the message, a chill crawling down my spine. That night, the messages started. "Unknown, you're not done. You can't quit." At first, I ignored them. Then they got personal. "Unknown, why did you leave me? You're so close." The final message made my stomach turn. "Unknown, look outside." I froze, the air around me suddenly feeling suffocating. My heart thundered as I forced myself to glance toward the window. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, just beyond the street lamp's flickering glow, a figure stood motionless, watching. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. A new message buzzed. "Unknown, let me in." The next time I played, Spectre was waiting. Her tone was colder than usual. "You're back," she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't have a choice, I admitted. The messages, the figure outside my window, what's happening? Her silence was deafening. Then she said, "You opened the door, didn't you?" "No. I swear I didn't." She sighed. A sound that carried more weight than I could understand. "It doesn't matter. You've seen it now. And it's seen you." "What does that mean?" My voice cracked, a mix of frustration and fear. "Shadow's Cape isn't just a game," she said. "It's something else. It pulls you in, tests you, and if you fail." Her voice cut off abruptly, replaced by static. A new voice, deep and echoing, took over the mic. "Failure isn't the word. It's destiny." "Spectre?" I whispered, my hands gripping the desk. "What's going on?" "She can't help you," the voice continued. "But I can. All you have to do is play." I ripped off the headset, breathing hard. My phone buzzed immediately. It was a text from Spectre. "Spectre, you need to run. Now." I didn't run. I stayed up all night, staring at the blank screen of my laptop, the headset lying on the desk like a snake waiting to strike. I wanted to believe it was all a sick joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. At 3 a.m. a knock shattered the silence. It was soft at first, almost polite. Then louder. And louder. I crept toward the door, every step weighted with dread. "Who's there?" I croaked. No answer. Just another knock, sharp and deliberate. I peeked through the peephole, my breath hitching. There was no one there. The knock came again. When I woke up, I was back at my desk. My laptop was on. The game running. My character stood in front of the door in the fortress again. It was open now, revealing darkness beyond. A message flashed across the screen. "Welcome back, player. The next level awaits." And somewhere in the room, I swear I heard Spectre whisper, "You shouldn't have come back." Story 3. I never believed in curses. Not until I saw what happened at Black Hollow. It began with a phone call late on a winter night. The kind of call that leaves a pit in your stomach before you even answer. "It's Lisa," the voice on the other end said, tight and trembling. "I need your help." Lisa had been a friend once, someone from a past I thought I'd left behind. Yet here she was, her voice crackling with panic. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Nick," she whispered, almost too quiet to hear. "He's been different. Ever since he started going to that house." "What house?" A pause. Then, with a tremor in her voice, "The one on Black Hollow Road." The next evening, I found myself at Lisa's house. Snow was falling in heavy, wet flakes, muffling the world in an eerie quiet. When she opened the door, her eyes were rimmed with red. And she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank God," she breathed, pulling me inside. I didn't know who else to call. "Lisa, what's going on?" I asked, shaking the snow from my coat. She led me to the living room, where a crumpled piece of paper lay on the coffee table. "He's been going to that house every night," she said, her voice cracking. "And every time he comes back, he's less of himself." I unfolded the paper, a crude map of Black Hollow Road, with an X marking a spot deep in the woods. Beside it, written in jagged letters, were the words, "Don't look inside." "What does this mean?" I asked, my throat tightening. Lisa shook her head, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I don't know. He won't tell me. But last night, he didn't come back until almost dawn. And when I asked where he'd been, he just stared at me." "Stared at you?" She nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Like I wasn't even there." That night, we followed Nick. His car was parked at the edge of the woods, where the road turned into a snow-covered trail. We waited until he disappeared into the trees before stepping out into the cold. "Lisa, maybe we should call the police," I suggested, glancing at the dark forest ahead. "And tell them what?" "That my husband's sneaking off to a creepy house. They'll think I'm crazy." She gripped my arm. "Please, Sam. I need to know what he's doing." Reluctantly, I nodded. And we followed the faint footprints Nick had left in the snow. The trees pressed close around us, their skeletal branches forming a canopy that seemed to swallow the moonlight. The only sound was the crunch of our boots and the occasional whisper of the wind. When the house came into view, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was old, too old. The roof sagged under the weight of the snow, and the windows were boarded up. A faint light flickered inside, casting distorted shadows that writhed against the walls. "Nick's in there," Lisa whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I have to." The front door creaked as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavy, filled with the smell of mildew and something sharp, like burnt metal. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of dark liquid, their contents moving sluggishly as though alive. "Lisa, we shouldn't be here," I said, my voice barely audible. Then we heard it, a low, murmuring voice coming from deeper inside the house. Lisa gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "That's him," she said. We followed the sound to a large room at the back of the house. Nick stood at the center, his back to us, hunched over a table. The book in front of him was massive, its pages yellowed and covered in symbols that seemed to writhe under the flickering light of a single candle. "Nick?" Lisa's voice was small, trembling. He didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be here." "Nick, it's me. It's Lisa. What are you doing?" He straightened slowly, his movements unnervingly deliberate. When he turned to face us, I felt my blood run cold. His eyes were hollow, ringed with shadows that seemed to shift and swirl. "Lisa," he said, his voice flat, empty. "You shouldn't have come." "What's happening to you?" she cried, stepping closer. "Talk to me. Please." His lips curled into a faint, unnatural smile. "It's too late." "Too late for what?" I demanded, stepping between them. "Nick, you're scaring her. You're scaring me. What's going on?" He tilted his head, studying me like I was something he couldn't quite understand. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." He pointed to the book. "It's older than this place. Older than us. And it doesn't belong here." "What doesn't belong here?" Lisa asked, her voice breaking. Nick's gaze flicked to her. And for a moment, I thought I saw something, regret, maybe even fear. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "They're coming," he said simply. "Who's coming?" I asked, my heart pounding. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back from the table, gesturing toward the book. "You'll see." Suddenly, the candle went out, plunging the room into darkness. Lisa screamed. And I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. But before we could reach it, a sound filled the room, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Run," Nick said. His voice almost a whisper. "Don't look back." We didn't need to be told twice. We stumbled out into the snow, the growl following us, growing louder, more distorted. The house seemed to shudder. The windows glowing faintly with a sickly green light. When we reached the car, Lisa turned back, her face pale. "Nick, he's still in there. He told us to run." I snapped, yanking the door open. "Lisa, we have to go." The house let out a sound like a dying scream, and then it collapsed inward, vanishing into the ground as though it had never been there. The air went silent. And the woods felt darker, heavier. Lisa left town the next day. She couldn't bear to stay without Nick. As for me, I've tried to move on, but the memory lingers, the jars, the growl. Nick's final words. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it again, the growl, low and distant. And when I close my eyes, I see Nick's face, hollow and shadowed, whispering the same warning. "They're coming." Story 4. It was one of those nights when the world seemed to unravel. The wind didn't just howl, it roared, carrying an almost human anguish. Snow fell so thick it blurred everything into a suffocating white void. My destination? Raven's Cross, a forgotten stretch of wilderness buried in a storm. Lily's voice still echoed in my head. "You have to come." Anna's, not Anna anymore. When I arrived at the cabin, the windows glowed faintly with firelight, but the place felt cold, lifeless. Lily threw the door open before I could knock. Her eyes wild, her hair clinging to her damp, pale face. "She's in her room," she said, her voice tight with panic. "But she's not talking to me anymore." "Not really." "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping inside. The air inside the cabin was thick, oppressive, like it was holding its breath. "She's saying things, Sam," Lily whispered, clutching her arms like she was trying to hold herself together. "Things she can't know. And she said you were coming." I stopped mid-step, my stomach twisting. "How did she know I was coming?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know. She hasn't left the room since last night." The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, each creak of the wooden floorboards amplified by the silence. When we reached Anna's door, Lily hesitated, her hand trembling over the knob. "Are you coming in?" I asked, glancing at her. "She scares me," Lily admitted, her voice cracking. It's like she knows things. Things she shouldn't." I opened the door. Anna sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by sheets of paper. Each page was covered in strange, jagged symbols, like a language no one should understand. Her small hands moved feverishly, her pencil scratching across the paper in frantic strokes. "Anna?" I said softly. Her head tilted, her dark hair falling over her face. Slowly, she turned to look at me. Her eyes, once bright and full of curiosity, were distant, like she was staring into something far away. "Uncle Sam," she said, her voice flat. "You brought the storm." My chest tightened. "Anna. What are you talking about? It's just a snowstorm." She smiled faintly, but it wasn't her smile. It was cold, alien. "They're in the storm. They've always been there." "Who's they?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Anna, you're scaring your mom. What's going on?" She didn't answer. Instead, she held up one of her drawings, a jagged spiral surrounded by claw-like shapes. "They told me to draw this." "Who told you?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but the fear bubbling in my chest made it impossible to stay calm. Her gaze fixed on mine, and her next words chilled me to the core. "The ones who whispered your name." Behind me, Lily let out a sharp gasp. "Anna, stop. Don't say things like that." Anna didn't even flinch. "They're not mad at you, Mommy. Not yet." "Anna, listen to me," I said, gripping her shoulders gently. "This isn't a game. You're scaring us." "Who are you talking about?" "The ones who watch," she whispered, leaning closer. Her breath was cold, colder than the storm outside. "They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Lily demanded, stepping into the room. "Anna, what do they want?" Anna's expression softened, almost like pity. "You can't understand. You'll see when it's too late." The wind outside screamed, rattling the windows so hard I thought they might shatter. Lily flinched, gripping my arm. "Sam, this isn't normal." "She's not normal." "Anna," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever's happening, you can tell me. You know I'll help you." Her eyes flicked to the window, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not about help. It's about letting them in." Another bang echoed through the cabin, louder this time, shaking the walls. Lily screamed, pulling me back. "What was that?" Anna tilted her head, listening. "They're here." I ran to the window and peered outside, but all I could see was the storm. Then, just at the edge of the tree line, I saw them, figures, tall and thin, moving slowly through the snow. Their outlines blurred, as though the storm itself was part of them. "Sam?" Lily's voice was barely audible. "What do you see?" "They're real," I said, my voice trembling. "Something's out there." Anna stood, her small frame silhouetted against the flickering firelight. "You have to let them in." "No!" Lily shouted, stepping between her and the door. "Anna, stop this. Whatever's happening, it's not real." Anna's eyes darkened, her voice losing all trace of warmth. "You don't decide what's real, Mommy. They do." "Who are they?" I yelled, my fear boiling over. "Anna, what's happening?" She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "You brought them with you. You always do." The banging grew louder, more insistent, until the entire cabin seemed to shake. The lights flickered, plunging us into brief moments of darkness. Lily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We have to leave. Now." Anna's laughter stopped us cold. It wasn't the laugh of a child, it was low, hollow, and filled with something I couldn't name. "You can't leave," she said. "They're already inside." The fire sputtered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The figures outside were closer now. Their faces, or what passed for faces, pressing against the glass. Empty eyes stared back at me, unblinking, endless. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Anna looked at me, her smile fading. "You." Lily grabbed her daughter, pulling her toward the hallway. "We're leaving," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Sam, come on." But I couldn't move. The door burst open, snow and wind pouring inside, and the figures stepped over the threshold. They didn't walk, they glided, their movements slow and deliberate. The room filled with a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through my bones. "Sam, please," Lily cried, her voice distant as the world narrowed to the figures before me. The tallest of them stopped inches away, its head tilting as it studied me. Then, in a voice like cracking ice, it spoke, "You opened the door." I didn't remember opening it. But I knew, somehow, they were right. The next thing I knew, I was alone. The storm had stopped, the cabin silent. Anna and Lily were gone. The snow outside was untouched, no footprints, no signs of the figures. Just the emptiness of the woods and the distant echo of Anna's voice. "They're not done." Story 5. It was the dead of winter, and the storm that night wasn't like any other. The snow didn't just fall, it smothered everything, turning the woods outside into a suffocating white abyss. My plan had been simple: drive to the next town, crash at a motel, and figure out my life in the morning. But plans mean nothing when you take a wrong turn into the unknown. The sign for Briarwood Hollow appeared out of nowhere, battered and half buried in the snow. I didn't recognize the name, and it wasn't on my map. But with the storm intensifying and my gas gauge hovering dangerously close to empty, I didn't have a choice. The road led me into a thick forest, the trees looming like silent sentinels. My headlights barely cut through the swirling snow, and every turn felt tighter, the road narrower. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, the forest opened into a clearing. Ahead, a gas station flickered weakly under a single, buzzing neon light. The place looked abandoned, but the faint glow in the windows said otherwise. I parked and stepped out, the cold biting into my skin. As I pushed open the door, the bell above it jingled, the sound jarringly loud against the storm's muffled roar. "Evening," a voice called from behind the counter. The man was older, his face weathered and his eyes sharp. He didn't look surprised to see me, which was odd considering the emptiness of the place. "Hi," I said, brushing snow from my jacket. "Do you have gas?" "I'm almost out." He nodded slowly. "Pump's still working. But you should hurry. Storm's not getting any kinder." "Yeah, I noticed." I hesitated. "Is there a motel around here?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Briarwood Inn. Few miles down the road." "But listen," his voice dropped, and he leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine. "Don't take the second left. Stay on the main road. No matter what." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a smile. Okay. Thanks for the advice. Outside, the wind howled louder, whipping snow into my face as I filled the tank. I couldn't shake the man's warning. What was on the second left? And why was it so important to avoid it? Back on the road, the storm seemed even worse. The snow piled up so quickly that the road vanished beneath it, and my tires skidded with every turn. Then I saw it, a fork in the road. The first left was barely visible, half covered by snowdrifts. But the second left was different. It was clear, almost unnaturally so, the trees on either side forming a tunnel that seemed to beckon me. I slowed, my hands tightening on the wheel. Don't take the second left. The words echoed in my head, but my curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I turned. The road was unervingly smooth, the snow thinning as if the storm couldn't touch this place. The trees were impossibly tall, their branches twisting into shapes that didn't seem natural. And then I saw it, a light in the distance. Faint but steady. As I got closer, the outline of a house emerged, old and weathered, yet oddly intact. The light came from a single window, flickering like a candle. I stopped the car, the engine idling as I stared. What is this place? I muttered to myself. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind me, low and raspy. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the storm, swirling in eerie silence. Something compelled me to leave the car and approach the house. Each step felt heavier, the air colder, as if the very atmosphere wanted me gone. The door creaked open before I could touch it, revealing a dimly lit interior. A fire burned weakly in the hearth, and the faint scent of something metallic lingered in the air. Hello? I called, my voice trembling. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and hollow. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. You came, she said, her voice soft and strange. Do I know you? I asked, stepping back instinctively. She tilted her head, her smile fading. No. But I know you. I've been waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. Waiting for what? Her gaze flicked to the fireplace, where a blackened, warped mirror hung above the mantel. It's not about what, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's about who. I followed her gaze. The mirror's surface was cracked. But something moved within it, something that wasn't my reflection. A shadow, tall and twisted, its edges writhing like smoke. What is that? I demanded, my voice breaking. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. It's what brought you here. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and a low, guttural sound filled the room. The woman stepped closer, her voice urgent. You need to leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I stumbled back toward the door, but when I turned, it was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Where's the door? I stammered. It's too late, she said, her voice trembling now. You've seen it. And now it sees you. The mirror shattered, the pieces hanging in the air like frozen shards of time. From the void beyond, the shadow emerged, towering over us. Its form was shifting, formless yet solid, its presence suffocating. Run, the woman screamed, shoving me toward a side door that hadn't been there before. I didn't argue. I bolted through the narrow hallway, the walls closing in around me. The shadow's growl followed, growing louder, closer. I burst outside into the freezing night, the storm slamming into me with full force. Behind me, the house groaned, its walls twisting as if consumed by the shadow. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I don't remember how I made it back to the main road. By the time I reached the gas station, dawn was breaking, the storm finally subsiding. The man from the counter was standing outside, his expression grim. "You took the second left, didn't you?" he said. I nodded, too shaken to lie. He sighed, shaking his head. "They always do. To this day. I can't explain what happened that night. The house, the woman, the shadow, they're burned into my memory. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I hear the mirror shatter again. And I wonder, if I ever lose my way again, will the house at Briarwood Hollow be waiting for me?" Story 6. The storm was merciless, a howling beast that clawed at the cabin I'd stumbled into hours earlier. The fire sputtered in the wood stove, barely holding back the cold. My car was stranded miles away, swallowed by snow drifts, and my phone had long since died. Alone, I tried convincing myself that the stories about Pine Hollow were just that, stories. Until the tapping began. It was faint at first. A rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the window. My breath hitched, and I froze, staring into the dark glass. All I saw was my pale, wide-eyed reflection. But then it came again, sharper this time. I stood, forcing my trembling legs to carry me to the door. "Hello?" I called out into the storm as I opened it a crack. The cold surged in like a living thing, biting at my skin. Snow swirled violently, but no one was there. Just the wind and the skeletal trees. But then I saw them, footprints, leading from the woods to my window. They stopped abruptly, mere feet from the door. I slammed the door shut, bolting it as my heart hammered in my chest. The tapping resumed, this time from above. Tap, tap, tap. "Impossible," I muttered under my breath, backing away from the door. The lights flickered, and a cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing the fire. "Why did you let them in?" The voice came from behind me. I spun around to see a woman standing just inside the door I had locked seconds ago. Her clothes were soaked, her hair plastered to her gaunt face. But it was her eyes that froze me in place, dark, hollow, and utterly lifeless. "Who are you?" I demanded, gripping a fire poker like a lifeline. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "They're watching." "Who's watching?" My voice cracked. "How did you get in?" She ignored my question, her gaze darting to the window. "You felt it, didn't you? The pull?" "What pull?" I was shouting now, panic clawing at me. "What are you talking about?" Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. "It's the storm. It brings them. It hides them." I stepped closer, my grip tightening on the fire poker. "Who are you talking about? What's out there?" She turned to me, her expression one of pure dread. "They're not out there anymore. You let them in." The words sent a chill down my spine. "I didn't let anyone in." Her gaze locked onto mine, unblinking. "They don't need doors. They don't need walls. They just need you to see them." The tapping grew louder, now coming from every direction, the walls, the ceiling, the windows. It was no longer rhythmic, it was frantic. As if 100 unseen hands were clawing to get in. "What do they want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, as if summoned by my question, the tapping stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing down on me like a weight. "They want to be remembered," she finally said. Her voice was soft, hollow. "And they'll use you to do it." The lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. When they came back, the woman was gone. Only her wet footprints remained, leading to the center of the room and stopping abruptly. I barely had time to process her disappearance when the shadows on the walls began to move. At first, I thought it was the flicker of the firelight, but then I realized the fire had gone out. The shadows were moving on their own. "Stop," I whispered, my voice trembling as I backed into the corner. "This isn't real." A voice echoed from the darkness, deep and resonant. "Real enough." I froze, the fire poker shaking in my hand. "Who's there?" The shadows coalesced, forming a figure at the far end of the room. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its face was obscured, but its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. "You called us," it said, its voice a low growl that resonated in my chest. "I didn't call anyone," I shouted, my voice breaking. "You looked," it said, stepping closer. "That's all it takes." The tapping resumed, louder than ever, as if the very walls were alive with movement. The figure stretched its hand toward me, the shadows around it writhing like smoke. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, pressing myself against the wall. Its head tilted, the movement slow and deliberate. "You." "Why me?" My voice was barely audible. It leaned closer, its glowing eyes inches from mine. "Because you believe." The tapping reached a fever pitch, the walls groaning as the room seemed to collapse around me. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the fire poker like a lifeline. "This isn't real. This isn't real." When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The fire was burning again, casting warm, flickering light across the now silent cabin. The tapping had stopped. The woman, the shadow, they were gone. I stumbled to the door, throwing it open and stepping into the storm. The footprints were gone, and the woods were silent, as if nothing had happened. But as I turned to leave, I caught one last glimpse of the cabin. In the window, just visible through the swirling snow, was my own reflection. Except it wasn't me. It was the shadow, smiling back. Story 7. The night was suffocatingly quiet. A thick fog had wrapped itself around the woods, turning the world into a swirling gray nothingness. Aaron and I had chosen this trail for its supposed seclusion, but now, in the middle of nowhere, it felt like a terrible mistake. The fire crackled softly between us, but even its warmth couldn't chase away the unease that crept through my chest. "Do you hear that?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice sounded too loud, almost intrusive. "Hear what?" Erin's reply was casual, but I could see her shoulders tense as she poked at the fire. "That's just it," I said, leaning forward. "There's nothing. No crickets. No rustling. It's like the forest's dead." Erin gave a nervous laugh, but it was forced. "It's just the fog. It messes with sound." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is different. It feels wrong." She opened her mouth to respond, but then we both froze. A faint light flickered through the fog, far off among the trees. It wasn't the steady beam of a flashlight, it wavered, soft and golden, like an old lantern. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. Aaron squinted into the distance. "Probably another camper. No one else is supposed to be out here," I said, my voice trembling. "We're miles off the main trail." The light bobbed slightly, as if it were moving. Aaron stood abruptly, grabbing her flashlight. "Maybe they're lost." "Aaron, wait," I said, grabbing her arm. "Something about this feels wrong." She shook me off, her jaw tight. "What if it's someone who needs help?" I hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But we're staying together." We stepped away from the fire, the cold wrapping around us like a wet blanket. The fog thickened as we moved, swallowing the light of the fire behind us. The lantern's glow remained ahead. Distant but steady. "Hey!" Erin called out, her voice echoing eerily in the mist. "Do you need help?" The light didn't stop. It continued its slow, rhythmic bobbing. As though whoever held it was leading us deeper into the woods. "Why aren't they answering?" I muttered, glancing around. The trees were barely visible, their outlines blurred by the fog. Erin hesitated, but then called out again. "Hello? We're here to help." The light stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then it began moving again, this time, toward us. My breath caught in my throat. "Erin, we need to go back." "Maybe they didn't hear us," she said, but her voice was shaky now. "Let's get a little closer." "No," I said firmly, grabbing her arm. "We shouldn't be here." She turned to me, her eyes wide. "You feel it too, don't you? Like we're not supposed to see this?" "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "So let's go." But the light was almost upon us now, illuminating a tall, shadowy figure. My heart hammered in my chest as I strained to make out details. The figure was wrong, its proportions too long. Its movements too smooth, as if it were gliding rather than walking. Who's there?" Erin stammered, stepping back. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it stopped a few feet away, holding the lantern aloft. Its face was obscured by the fog, but its presence was suffocating. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The figure tilted its head slowly, almost curiously. Then it spoke, not in words, but in a sound that reverberated in my chest, low and guttural. "Did you hear that?" Erin whispered, clutching my arm. "It's like it's inside my head." The lantern's glow brightened, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces in the fog, twisted, agonized faces, mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, pulling Erin with me. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firm despite the terror clawing at my chest. The figure tilted its head again, and the guttural sound came once more. This time, I understood it. "You've already stayed too long." Erin's grip on my arm tightened. "What does that mean?" "Stayed too long for what?" "I don't care," I said, dragging her back toward the campsite. "We're getting out of here." The figure didn't follow, but the light remained, flickering in the fog like a watchful eye. The air grew colder with every step, our breaths visible in the icy gloom. When we finally reached the campsite, the fire had gone out, and the air was still, unnervingly so. "Grab your stuff," I said, fumbling with my bag. "We're leaving." "We can't," Erin said, her voice trembling. "The trail's gone." "What?" I turned to her, my stomach dropping. She pointed toward where the trail had been. It was gone, swallowed by the fog. In its place, the lantern's glow flickered once more, closer now. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't happening." "They're playing with us," Erin said, her voice cracking. "It's like they're hurting us." "Who's they?" I snapped, panic rising in my chest. Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know." The light flared, casting long, distorted shadows across the trees. The guttural sound came again, louder this time, as though it surrounded us. "They're coming," Erin whispered, her face pale. "We need to." Before she could finish, the lantern's light dimmed, and the shadows surged forward. They weren't just shadows anymore, they had form, substance, and they moved with a terrifying speed. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Erin's hand and pulling her into the woods. We stumbled through the fog, branches clawing at our faces, the guttural sounds growing louder behind us. "I can't," Erin sobbed, tripping over a root. "I can't." "Yes, you can," I yelled, hauling her to her feet. "Don't stop." But it was too late. The shadows caught up, enveloping her in an instant. Her scream cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the wind and the flickering lantern. I don't remember how I got out. One moment, I was running, the next, I was on the main road. The fog lifting as dawn broke. Search parties found no trace of Erin, no footprints, no campsite, just my frantic, circular tracks. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I see the lantern flickering in the distance. And I hear her voice, faint and desperate. "You stayed too long." Story 8. The air inside the mine was heavy, damp, and smelled of rust and something else, something sharp, like metal scraping against metal. Every step we took felt louder than it should have. The sound of our boots on the rocky floor echoing endlessly. Clara's grip on my arm tightened as we moved deeper, her flashlight beam trembling as much as my own. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. Her voice sounded small, swallowed up by the vast emptiness of the tunnel. "I know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to find somewhere safe until morning." "What if this place isn't safe?" she shot back, her wide eyes darting to the walls as the whispers began again, soft, distant, like a conversation we weren't meant to hear. Clara stopped abruptly, her nails digging into my arm. "Did you hear that?" "I hear whispers," I said, my pulse quickening. "It's probably the wind." "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "It's not the wind. It said my name." I froze, the weight of her words settling in my chest like a stone. "That's impossible." Her flashlight wavered, and her breathing quickened. "It's not." "I heard it, Ethan. Clear as day. It said my name like it was right next to me." Before I could respond, the whispers grew louder, closer. They weren't just random murmurs anymore, they were words. I couldn't make them out, but they sounded urgent, angry, pleading. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the tunnel. The sound bounced back at me, distorted, as if the mine itself were answering. Clara tugged at my sleeve. "Why would you do that?" she hissed. "Why would you call out to it?" "To what?" I snapped, turning to her. "There's no one here." "Then who's whispering?" she countered, her voice cracking. "Ethan, this place isn't empty. I can feel it." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was just imagining things. But the whispers changed again. This time, I understood them. "Turn back." My flashlight flickered, and I swore under my breath, hitting it until the beam steadied. Clara grabbed my wrist, her fingers trembling. "Ethan, did you hear that? Did you hear what it said?" I nodded slowly. "It's nothing. It's just the echoes." "It's not the echoes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's them." "Who's them?" I asked, my frustration mounting. "Clara, you're not making any sense." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a low, guttural sound reverberated through the tunnel. It wasn't the whispers, it was something deeper, primal, like a growl that vibrated in my chest. "Run," Clara said, her voice trembling as she stepped back. "Run from what?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing here." Her flashlight beam swept across the walls, landing on something that made her freeze. Slowly, I followed her gaze. At first, it looked like just another shadow, but then it moved, smoothly, deliberately. A figure stepped out of the darkness. Impossibly tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, the whispers grew deafening, overlapping into a cacophony of voices, each one pleading, crying, screaming. "Ethan," Clara said, her voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." The figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes locking onto us. My flashlight flickered again, the beam catching its face, if you could call it a face. The features were blurred, indistinct, as though it was trying to be human but couldn't quite manage it. "What do you want?" I shouted, the fire poker shaking in my hand. The thing tilted its head, and the whispers stopped abruptly. The silence was worse than the noise. "You've come too far," it said, its voice not coming from its mouth but from everywhere at once. Clara let out a strangled sob, her hands flying to her ears. "Stop it. Get out of my head. Leave her alone," I yelled, stepping in front of her. The figure didn't move, but its voice came again, quieter this time. "It's too late." "What does that mean?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What's too late?" It reached out a hand, long and skeletal, its fingers curling toward us. Clara screamed, stumbling back, and the air around us grew heavier, colder. The light from our flashlights dimmed, swallowed by the darkness. "We're leaving," I shouted, grabbing Clara's hand and pulling her back toward the entrance. "Come on." But the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, the way out farther than it should have been. Behind us, the whispers returned, louder and angrier. "They won't let us leave," Clara sobbed, stumbling as I dragged her forward. "Yes, they will," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. "We just have to keep moving." The guttural growl came again, closer this time. And I turned to see the figure standing just feet away. Its hand reached out, and for a moment, I felt something, an icy, crushing pressure, like a weight pressing down on my chest. "Ethan," Clara whispered, her voice faint. "It's inside me. I can feel it." "No," I said, shaking her. "Don't listen to it. Fight it." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I don't think I can." The light of the entrance appeared ahead, faint but real. I pulled Clara with all my strength, her steps growing weaker with each passing moment. The whispers screamed in protest, the figure looming closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. We burst out of the mine, collapsing onto the cold ground outside. The air was silent again. The whispers gone. But when I turned to Clara, her eyes were blank, her expression hollow. "Clara?" I said, shaking her. "Clara, talk to me." She looked at me, her lips trembling. "They're still here," she whispered. "They're never going to leave." I turned back toward the mine, but the entrance was gone. In its place was solid rock, as if the mine had never existed. Clara hasn't been the same since. She barely speaks, and when she does, it's always the same words. "It's too late." Sometimes, at night, I hear the whispers again, faint and distant. And I know that one day, they'll call me back.